Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 11 o'clock talk. Xeno, when you're ready.
Thank you. All right, hello everyone. I'm Xeno, and the About Me slide, I'm going to share with you something that most conferences don't get. Just because of our location, the About Me is going to include the fact that I'm actually descended from French Canadians. You wouldn't know based on my name, but is actually true. They said, like, this Quebec place, it's like too warm here, so how about we move to Minnesota, a little bit farther north, where it's like nice and cold, and like all of our fields, French Canadian farmers, all of our fields are nice and full of boulders from the glaciers. So long time, few generations back, but descendant of French Canadians. But other than that, about me is that, okay, yes. Yeah. Say? Sure, invite you. You don't want to go to Minnesota, no. So the majority of my time of what I do is I work on a nonprofit called Open Security Training 2 that I started. It makes free classes, free as in beer, free as in freedom. So these are 100% free classes, and they are also open source licensed. A minority of my time, this is the stuff I'm going to be talking to you about today. 25% of my time I do consulting and just research for fun. Today's talk is the research for fun category. And also, the research is for fun, and it's a Trojan horse, specifically so I can get this slide up in front of you just to tell you about open security training. And a quick shout out to some of the other open security trainers, because these are awesome people who make free classes for you on things like firmware and reverse engineering and exploits that you can go take online for free. All right, so for this talk, what do I want to know? I want to know what Bluetooth chip is in any given device that I randomly scan. So we've got some devices that support Bluetooth, and I want to know which chips are inside of those things. Now I know this for some of them, but I want to know it for everything. Now why would I want to know that? Well, the answer is because I want to know what kind of vulnerabilities exist in these things. So back in 2018, Armis released Bleeding Bit. This was a over-the-air pre-authentication, no authentication wireless exploit for Texas Instruments chips. So just send a magic packet, get code execution on some Cisco Linksys routers that happen to use Texas Instruments Bluetooth chips. In 2020, my wife, Xeno Kovah, gave a talk at Black Hat where she had done some research as well, finding vulnerabilities for just, again, over-the-air exploit, send a packet, get arbitrary code execution. And she posted the POCs for those, so those are freely available as well. So she found it for Texas Instruments and also Silicon Labs. And furthermore, there are some researchers in Germany that have been focusing out of TU Darmstadt. They focus on wireless attacks, and they had found in Broadcom devices a send a magic packet and get code execution. So the question is, how am I going to figure out how any given device has a particular Bluetooth chip and whether it's vulnerable to firmware exploit? Well, like I said, so I started this, as the abstract says, I started this sort of during the pandemic. So my wife had started Dark Mentor in 2018, started presenting exploits in 2020, and right before the pandemic hit, we had already sort of planned to move from Silicon Valley back to our house in Maryland. And so I said, well, she's got Bluetooth exploits, but we don't actually know where we can use them. What can we actually exploit with these things? We can ask the vendor. The vendor's not going to tell us every single customer who's ever bought a Texas Instruments chip. So I said, okay, we're going to go on a road trip across the country. I want to start sniffing Bluetooth devices and see if I can, collect some information, and maybe this will help me figure out, what your exploits are good for. All right, what hardware did I use for this? Well, I'm going to just blip through this to say, I put the specs of the different hardware here just to make a little point that'll be relevant in a couple of slides. So these are just some random devices I had laying around. Got the Raspberry Pi Zero, that's the cheapest one, Raspberry Pi 4, and the BeagleBone Black. The specs, the reason I put the specs here is because I'm not going to want to have devices that are super beefy and powerful. I'm going to want power sipping devices that will last for a long time. And so something with less RAM is going to use less power. Something with a single core instead of 4 cores running at higher clock speeds is going to use less power. So at least in terms of price, the winner here is going to be the Raspberry Pi Zero. Then amongst these things, I have to say, okay, well, what sniffs the most stuff? What catches the most Bluetooth traffic? And so when I compared, it was sort of surprising to me, the Raspberry Pi Zero versus the Raspberry Pi 4, it actually captured just literally holding the two devices and driving around for a while. The Raspberry Pi Zero caught almost twice as many devices. And these both have just PCB antennas. They don't have external antenna plugs or anything like that, and they just have little wires on the PCB. So for whatever reason, the Raspberry Pi Zero, which came out earlier, has a superior antenna to the 4. And then what was really surprising was the BeagleBone Black wireless with just a basic Bluetooth antenna that I had laying around the house, not anything power amplified or anything like that. The BeagleBone Black wireless with an external antenna actually only did as well as the Raspberry Pi 4 rather. So the winner here was actually the Raspberry Pi Zero. And then this is the thing that I said I really care about, things like power. So how long can I run a device off of a battery pack? And here the very clear winner is the Raspberry Pi Zero. Now, why do I care about running something for a really long time off of a battery pack? Because I'm not going to be like continuously driving around for 90 hours, right? Well, this is why. Moving, right? So this is a particular overpass in the Washington, D.C. area where I like to put Bluetooth sniffing boxes and then let it run for 4 days and capture about 15,000 named devices. So many, many more non-named devices, but 15,000 about in 4 days. So yeah, that's a great place for sniffing. Okay, so the software for all of my data collection is available, and it's nothing I'm proud of. I want to be very, very clear about that. There's nothing elite about this, and there's nothing special. It's bash scripts around Linux tools. Keep it simple, stupid. All right. So 99% of my data is all of that. And again, I started doing this like at the beginning of the pandemic. So I've been sniffing for like 3+ years just for fun and behind the scenes. And then eventually I said, okay, I think I've got enough data now. I can maybe show some interesting examples. So I did actually do what they say to do, like so what the Linux developers tell you to do and use their dbust-based API and so forth. And just that is not fun. It is not great, and I didn't like it. And at the end of the day, I reverted back to all my bash scripts. So bash scripts for the win. Okay, so there's only 2 bits of background information about Bluetooth that you need to know to appreciate this talk. So we're going to be talking a lot about BD adders, Bluetooth device addresses. Now, in the case of Bluetooth Classic, that's the old original circa 2001, we have the BD adders broken up into 24 bits. For the most significant bits, I should say, I just grabbed like an image. Because the Bluetooth spec doesn't look particularly nice and doesn't read particularly nice, I just wanted some pictures, so I just grabbed some pictures from this particular website. So unfortunately, the most significant bits here are on the right-hand side. So the most significant bits, 24 bits, it's an OUI, an IEEE OUI, Organizational Unique Identifier, just like you're used to with Ethernet. So if you're familiar with the concept that an Ethernet address, the top 3 bytes are all, something about the company, that's going to be exactly the same in Bluetooth. So it looks like that, and flip it around. And you know now, okay, based on that BD adder, I know that this is a Responics company device. So now Bluetooth low energy is more complicated than that. So we've got 4 address types, and the first thing is there's just a single bit that says, is this a public address or is this a random address? So the single bit, if it says it's a public address, exactly the same as Bluetooth Classic. Most significant bits, OUI, you can know which company manufactured this device based on that. But then we have these other types, like the static address. So if this 1 bit in the packet says that it's a random address, then if the most significant 2 bits are 1, 1, then that is a random static address. Random static addresses don't change over time, but the key thing about them is that they don't have OUIs in them. They're just random bits. And so you can't say anything based on the static addresses to say this has to do with this or that company. Now, I guess I didn't mention, but we've got our little trackable guy here. So I'm going to be using this icon throughout the talk to say something about if there's a BD adder and it doesn't change over time, then that means it's trackable, right? So if I see it here and if I see it somewhere else, then I know that device moved between those 2 locations. So those are the trackable types. Then we have the ostensibly non-trackable types like the random private resolvable address. And in this case, it just means that it has a 0 and a 1 at the most significant bits, then some random bits and a hash of some key that is shared between devices. We don't care about that for this purpose. We just want to know that's an ostensibly not trackable, but we'll see that because of other metadata that may be available, these could still be trackable. And when you see things about like iPhones changing their like MAC addresses, their BD adders every 10 to 15 minutes, that's what they're using. They're using those private resolvable addresses. And then finally, you have the private non-resolvable address, 00 in the most significant bits, and just a bunch of random stuff beyond that. Okay, so in this talk, if you see things that look like this is BTMon output. This is just a Linux command line tool that captures the data between your host operating system, your Linux, and the Bluetooth controller, so the actual Bluetooth chip. The data that goes between them, captured and logged by BTMon. And this particular instance, we've got a public address, so it should be trackable, and then also the full BD adder is actually in the name that is advertised. So this is like some custom LED headlights. So you're driving around with your cool LED headlights that are purple and green and whatever, and you're also, being able to be tracked by your Bluetooth. All right, and if you see output in this talk that looks like this is the Tell Me Everything script that I made to just eventually dump all my data into a database and then pull it out. So this will have stuff right here, public, and this particular public device that's trackable everywhere is a diabetes management device from Abbott. Okay, there you're going to see a lot of screenshots. Some of them are like my data, just like I have a GPS logger, attached to a Linux box, just a GPS USB dongle. And sometimes I'll graph stuff that way, but more recently I've been enjoying using Wiggle for graphing and visualization to make things easier for you to see. Wiggle is a crowdsource, wireless, global crowdsourced infrastructure for collecting information about cellular networks, Wi-Fi networks, and Bluetooth networks. As of 2019, they added Bluetooth. So I'd known about this for a while, but I thought that it only did Wi-Fi. Just familiar with it as a Wi-Fi stumbling thing, but now they do Bluetooth, so that's great. Now I can get these nice maps of wherever I've been, and also the little junk Pixel phone that I run this Android application on, it gets better GPS signal than my USB dongle most of the time. Unfortunately, Wiggle is missing most of the data we would want to know about for Bluetooth sniffing and capture and investigation. It's basically got the BD adder and the name, and then recently I started convincing them to add a little bit more data, but mostly just the name and the address. So miscellaneous point I'll make is that this is super old statistics, but in my data, as of a long time ago, when I look at my data, I can see that I actually have like an order of magnitude more Bluetooth devices, right? So there are like, all of you are probably broadcasting Bluetooth right now. You're not probably all broadcasting Wi-Fi. And so this is in contrast to like some early work in the Bluetooth space where they said, oh, there's like 4 times as many Bluetooth devices as Wi-Fi. Well, now we're up to well over 10 times. All right, so like I said, this all started because I knew I was going to be going on a trip from Silicon Valley back to the house I already owned in Maryland because I didn't want to pay crazy Silicon Valley prices while I was working for Apple. So just to make that a little more visualizable, so you can see I lost GPS here in the middle, and but I still collected the data. So I just wanted to collect as much data as I could and post-process it later and figure out what was interesting. So here's some more recent anecdotes about what I've seen that's interesting. This is my data from this past DEF CON, and so I did Ring 0, I did a training, and then I attended DEF CON. So I just literally put my sniffer box up against the window during the training, and that's the GPS splat because GPS is not always super accurate. And then of course when you're inside a conference like DEF CON, and here like I'm not getting any GPS signal, so if you get anything, you get a big splat. So the interesting thing that I saw at the Palms Hotel for Ring 0 is there were these devices called pay range. And so throughout this talk, I'm going to be giving you little regexes, and these are kind of regexes you can use if you use my tool to dig through my database, and then you can find interesting things about devices you've seen. So there were devices that I saw that were called pay range, but when I inquired like, hey, what's your name? It would come back with actually a different name, like Blue Radios and then some 6 digits that turned out to be the least significant 6 digits of the BD adders. And sometimes it would come back as Blue Key pay range. So the thing about Bluetooth packets is you can have an advertiser in Bluetooth Low Energy, and this could be continuously spitting out these advertisement packets called advertisement indication, adv-ind. So it could be saying, hey, here's my name, here's my name, here's my name. Sometimes they'll be saying the name, but other times you have to actually send a scan request and say, what is your name? And then it comes back with, okay, here's my name. So these devices were continuously broadcasting pay range, but if I asked, then it came back with something called Blue Radios and part of their BD adder. So what's a blue radio? What's a pay range? So it turns out that this is a company that makes these devices that you can plug into vending machines, or you can plug into like pay laundry mats and stuff like that. And they're basically a company where they have an app, and they're sort of like PayPal. You put some money in their infrastructure, you run their app, and then their app talks to their cloud infrastructure, says, yes, Xeno has $4, talks to the vending machine, and then says, hey, vending machine, this little dongle here, you should trust this person, they've got money, distribute Snickers. So, when I was in high school, hacking vending machines was involved with like putting tape on the dollar bill and like pulling it back out. Nowadays, if you want to hack vending machines, you should know a little bit something about Bluetooth. All right, so it also said blue radios. And what is blue radios? Well, I go and I search for that. And it turns out blue radios is a Bluetooth module maker. So Bluetooth modules are essentially manufacturers in the middle. So sometimes people who make electronics, they buy a Bluetooth chip and they figure out, they designed it into their PCB themselves. Other times, they will work with a module vendor. The module vendor puts it onto a little PCB, and then you buy the little PCB and you slap that onto your big PCB. And they basically say it's for reasons of efficiency. If you're making a small number of units, it can be more efficient to do it this way. But the interesting thing about this is that once you start finding out which module makers are in use, like if you can identify a module, sometimes you can then know exactly which Bluetooth chips those modules are using. So the mini takeaway here is that identify the module maker, and there is a set. It's usually not one-to-one. It's usually a module vendor will maybe use 2 or 3 different Bluetooth chips, and which Bluetooth chip it's using is, again, what I want to know. So back to the very beginning, I said I want to know which Bluetooth chips things are running, so I know which things have vulnerable Bluetooth firmware, so we can know which exploits can be used. All right, so while I was wandering around at DEF CON, my MO is I'll have this device in my backpack, and then I'll have my phone app open, and the phone apps won't give you all the information, or they'll give you decent information, but it's not loggable and machine parsable, and I can't do anything with it afterwards. So I walk around and I wait until I see something that I've never seen before, and then when it is, I stop and I just stand there for a while and pretend I'm working, playing on my phone, and wait for the sniffer to find it amongst the hundreds or thousands of other devices. So I see something like this pop up called IGT card reader. While I specifically, I'm in the Wynn Hotel, but then I turn a corner and I go into the casino area, like casino floor, and then all of a sudden there's all these card readers on the casino floor. And so that was kind of interesting. So the phone app tells me useful information, like the manufacturer name is IGT. So I go and I Google it, and what do I find? Well, IGT is a gaming hardware maker. So they make these virtual slot machines, which are really just glorified desktop computers with multiple screens these days, and they just, click a button and it does the little game application. And indeed, you can find on their website that, yes, they sell replacement modules for their Bluetooth devices. Let's see, was there an animation there? No, okay. So when I look into their documentation a little bit more, you can see that what they're trying to sell is essentially a casino like Caesar's Palace or something like that. They have their applications. They want you to use the Caesar's Palace app. So now what they can do is they can say, instead of like a card that you put into the device that says like, here's your balance and here's how much money you have to gamble with, you can have your phone app and just like tap your phone app, your Caesar's Palace thing, and then put it really close to the Bluetooth reader that's next to the card reader, and then you can go ahead and keep gaming. And so the tapping is interesting because it's not tapping like NFC, which is like extremely, close range. This is actually still Bluetooth. It's just that, I can see in this other information that it's like transmitting at negative 72 dBm, which is like really, really, really low power. That's the kind of stuff where you really have to put the device up to it before the Bluetooth will be able to talk to each other. So other places that are using IGT in the Las Vegas area, you can see on a wiggle map, there's a giant splat for the Wynn casino. There's 4 other casinos with similar names that therefore we might assume that they have similar management, similar IT staff, similar technology in play. But in reality, there's a whole bunch of these things all over the Las Vegas area, and I don't know why they're broadcasting, and they're not always broadcasting. Also, I should say there are probably a lot more of these, but Wiggle is only going to graph stuff when it actually has a GPS signal. So if you're like in the middle of the Luxor Hotel, which is like a giant concrete pyramid thing, you probably don't have a good GPS signal. So I don't know why they're advertising, and I think they're probably misconfigured, but I don't know for sure. All right, so other location-based anecdotes. I probably need to speed way up. I took a vacation to Korea last year. My wife's Korean, and we ran around all over the place. You can see there's my personal GPS logging and the wiggle logging, which is much better and has me in the airplane and stuff, like sniffing the other people in the airplane's devices. But yes, obligatory. We had to run around Gangnam down in Gangnam is just the Gangnam from Gangnam Style is just this neighborhood down below the river. Okay, just FYI. So ran around there. An interesting finding from South Korea is there are these kick-going scooters. They're just like any other electric scooter, electric bike type thing. But what's interesting about them is that they're actually city-specific. This company does not operate anywhere else in Korea or the world. So when it comes to Bluetooth sniffing, you can have devices that are like region-specific, country-specific, and apparently city-specific. So if I was just doing this Bluetooth sniffing wherever I normally go, I would never ever see these things. Well, those are public BD adders. They are trackable. But what was way more interesting to me is that the BD adder says it's from Expressif. And Expressif is a Bluetooth silicon vendor. And what chip the device uses is one of the things I want to know. So the mini takeaway is that sometimes if the device is using Bluetooth Classic or BLE public addresses where you have that OUI, then you can actually say the vendor of these scooters didn't bother or they themselves do not have a registration with IEEE, therefore they couldn't even change the BD adder to one of their own. They just reused the one that came from the vendor, and now I have a very strong signal that that is an Expressif chip, and if there are any Expressif vulnerabilities, then they would be applicable in that context. All right, now this is going to be a little indirect. Randomly went to KAIST, which is a extremely well-regarded school in Korea. It's basically the MIT of Korea. Had a professor who was my professor in Minnesota, and then he was the professor in KAIST. Just randomly looking at devices, see these devices IVT something, don't know what they are. They're public devices, but what piqued my curiosity is they're transmitting at 8 dBm. That's a relatively high transmit power for most Bluetooth devices. So I look at the BD adder, it says it's BNCom. I say, what is BNCom? BNCom turns out to be a Korea-specific module maker, so mostly selling to other Korean companies. So here you can see some of their modules. And I still didn't really have a lead on what these IVTs were, but then I searched through my data for what are all the other BNCom devices that I've ever seen. I see this other device called BCM LN300AS, and I noticed that that looks very similar to the actual module naming convention that they're using for some modules. So they've got the LN100, we've got the LN200, and these are using NRF, or Nordic silicon chips. So then I go ahead and go to the FCC database. FCC is the regulatory authority in the United States for wireless devices. Everyone who sells a wireless device in America has to give them a bunch of information. Some of that information is made public, some of it is held back and restricted. But some of the information they give is what they call internal photos. They have external photos, what does it look like on the outside? Internal photos very frequently have the circuits and schematics of the internal devices, not schematics, just circuits. And so if we look at this device, and then we zoom in, and then we enhance, we can see that that is actually using an NRF 52805 chip. So, and that was like, I could actually just see it, and that was not me making that up. So the takeaway from this is that regulatory information can actually be used to sometimes pin a one-to-one mapping of this exact model has this exact chip, and again, which chip a device uses is what I want to know. Actually, a funny anecdote. Yeah, okay. I can't remember whether I was allowed to say it or not, but I think I am allowed. One of the devices that my wife looked at, she actually ultimately found the chip information out of like Japanese regulatory authority. We couldn't find anything anywhere, but we finally found like some Japanese FCC equivalent that had a nice picture of the chip for the device. All right, finally, something a little closer to home for some of you. Here's what the wiggle data looks like overall for Quebec City currently. And here's just my data from going from the airport here to the conference today. Zooming in a little bit, you can see that yesterday I went to the mall to replace my HDMI dongle because it broke. So, you know, there's that scene in The Matrix where like Cypher says, I don't even see the code anymore. I just see, blonde, redhead, brunette. Well, I don't even see the names anymore. I just see like, oh, that's a sleep apnea device. That's a passive entry for a keyless car system. That right there is a is physical GE security lock that we will talk about a little bit more later on. So anyways, this is the particular stuff that I see in the local area. And so again, I just wander around and I look. Once I see something I've never ever seen before, then it pops up and I go investigate a little bit. So one of the things that popped up, I was like, what is Ultimate V6? Never seen that before. Well, turns out that is a earbud. It's just some earbuds from a company called Sounds Good. But Sounds Good is a local company. Their entrepreneurial adventure began in 2019, a local flea market in Quebec City. So this is a local company that makes wireless earbuds. Looking at my data for a little more deep look. Okay, well, it turns out that if you're rocking some Ultimate V6s, you've got public BD addresses that never change, and therefore, anywhere you go, if a Wiggle person drives by, then they've captured your location at that time. It also says something about using Qualcomm technologies for one of the types of metadata, so that gives me an initial hint that maybe this device is using Qualcomm chips, which is one of the things I want to know. And also, it then says that it's made by Shenzhen Bolutech Technology Company. So I look into Shenzhen Bolutech Technology Company. In the FCC information on some model information, I can find something like this. This particular one is not the right chip for this particular device because it says it's using mesh, which is a different Bluetooth technology. But it does say that it's using Qualcomm. And if we rotate it like that, and if we zoom in, you can maybe make out that it's saying it's using CSR. So CSR is Cambridge Silicon Radio. It is a maker of chips that got bought by Qualcomm at some point. And then eventually I realized, oh, I could actually find a much better and more legible chip. I guess that's not super legible, but still it's just saying this company uses CSR chips, so now I know what they're actually using. And then if you're curious where these Ultimate V6s are popular, there's a decent number in Quebec City. They seem to be really popular in Montreal, tailing off in Ottawa. No one in Toronto wants any. So I don't know. They seem to be mostly distributed in this area, or sampling selection bias. Maybe there's just way more sniffers running around in Montreal. Maybe y'all need to put some wiggle on your phones and run around in this area and collect more information, and then maybe we'd see a whole lot more pop up here. Interesting random thought that, you know, these entrepreneurs from this area could find out where their devices are like showing up all over the world with the wiggle data. All right, so that's the end of the location-based anecdotes. Let's talk about some device-based anecdotes. All right, Tesla devices. I have a Tesla, and I've noticed that the name never changes and the BD adder never changes. So they have random static BD adders, so they never change. But then folks have found out on the internet, although this looks kind of random, if it starts with an S and it ends with a C and it's got a bunch of digits in between, it is actually going to be a hash, a partial hash of the VIN number. So there's a really good talk by the Trifinite folks where they dug all sorts of information about Teslas. So way better than I would cover, so I recommend checking that out. But obviously, if you've got a hash of a VIN number as part of the advertised Bluetooth device name, you could do a lookup table and just say, you know, VIN number 1, 2, 3, 4, hash them all, and then now you can like reverse lookup and say, okay, I know what Xeno's VIN number is. And, you know, some people don't tend to remember that Bluetooth is an attack surface, and so I think at this most recent pwned to own, it was good that we had a good reminder of that because the Teslas were actually pwned. Their first stage of breaking into the infotainment system was through Bluetooth. Now, the details of that have not actually been released yet. They may put a blog post at some point. They may be restricted. I don't know exactly how that goes with pwned to own. My hypothesis, my guess, because these infotainment units are just overglorified Linux systems, I should say my wife actually worked for Tesla before she left and did Dark Mentor. They're just Linux systems, and I'm pretty sure they just had a Linux BlueZ vulnerability. There have been many, and they broke in that way. But even that in and of itself is not particularly new or novel. Back in 2017, sorry, I think this was 2020, the Keen Lab folks broke into Lexus devices over Bluetooth. So they had 2017 model year Lexus devices send magic packets, break in, and now you take over the car from there. They did further chain of exploits to take over the full car. So I'm looking around, you know, I'm sniffing around. I see things like Rivians. Rivian, obviously a competitor to Tesla, another up-and-coming electric car maker. These are public BD and it's actually a Texas Instruments BD right there. It's just BTMon didn't know that, but mine does, just had an updated OUI database. And indeed, when you look at the FCC database, this is like, chef kiss, the perfect example of what I want to see. Like, that's my perfect world thing where I can just clearly, legibly see it is a CC2642 Texas Instruments chip. Now I know exactly which chip is associated with these Rivian devices. So if you're interested in car things, I'm not particularly, but all of these are a variety of regexes that you can go and look through Bluetooth data on, and I will tell you, all of them are trackable. So none of them are doing this as good as like an iPhone. Like basically, they all either have static BD adders, static Bluetooth low energy BD adders, or public BD adders. Now most of these things are infotainment systems. Most of these things are radios and stuff like that. But obviously we know that as car complexity is increasing and the things are turning into little networks of computers, that first initial initial hop point from which to bounce your way around the CAN bus is potentially damaging. All right, when I'm looking at surveillance cameras of the Nest variety, we have our first instance of something that actually does the right thing. So Nest is using a random resolvable Bluetooth address. So these Nest cameras are cycling their BD adders, so they're not just always this address is at that location. And I should say, like, threat modeling wise, it's worth saying, like, sometimes I think a lot of vendors, they think like, look, there's a camera, it's in your home, it's taking pictures of your home, like, who cares whether or not someone can track it? It's always going to, like, go to your home, right? But people move homes, and especially people move homes when they're, like, subject to stalkers and stuff like that. And so if you have devices that don't randomize their BD adders and that's associated with you and your person in your home, and then it shows up somewhere else, like, that's basically just telling stalkers, like, hey, they moved over here, you can go find them now. So this is to say, again, props to Nest in that they're actually randomizing this, which is doing the right thing. But they have these names that are also broadcast by the devices. These names are unique names, and these names are seemingly sequentially incrementing type names of the form N, and then 4 digits A to Z, 0 to 9. So that means that still, even though they're randomizing the Bluetooth address, even though these are ostensibly non-trackable on that basis, they're still going to be trackable on the basis of their names. And this is going to be, common mistake for things that are trying to randomize by BD adder. So it begs the question, if these are sort of incrementing, like where in the world is the Nest number 1? So we look at the Wiggle database, and it says that it is in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. But it also says that's in Japan, and it also says that it's in Great Britain. So it turns out that Wiggle, again, like I said, is not collecting the kind of information we necessarily need in order to say, is an N0001, is that the first ever Nest device sold, or is that just some random device called N001? So if it had this information, these 16-bit UUIDs that are also broadcast in some types of devices, there is a unique number that is associated with the Nest company that would allow us to actually differentiate and say this is a Nest device versus a non-Nest device. So the mini takeaway here is that if you have 16-bit UUIDs, you can associate that with a vendor like Nest or Google or Apple or Amazon, but you can also use it to detect whether or not a device is from that vendor. Now, I've like I said, I made some tickets for Wiggle. They've actually started collecting this. It is right now available on the phone app. It is not being correlated on the back-end database yet, but hopefully they'll be doing that in the future. All right, I see some of you wandering around the conference with flippers, and flippers are continuously beaconing for some reason. I don't know why. I don't know why because I don't have one. I don't have one because they have very low transmit power. So these would not be particularly useful in the context of Bluetooth attacks. Yes, I know there are some, proof of concept Bluetooth attacks and stuff. 0 dBm, according to the official Bluetooth range estimator on the Bluetooth website, is approximately 15 to 21 meters of clear space transmission. So yeah, that's not going to be super useful as a Bluetooth attack tool. It's great if you want to get up real close to your victim and try to attack them that way, but most of us want to stay far away if we're attacking someone. So here's the first time that I ever saw flipper devices. I was at hardware.io last year, and a whole bunch of these show up. So I then go and I say, okay, let's see whether Wiggle has actually seen any of these devices that I know are here in the Netherlands, in The Hague right now. Let's see where else Wiggle has seen them before. And just going down the list, second one, I get a hit. This particular flipper device was found at a Panera Bread outside of Atlanta, Georgia. So what we can take from this is that, again, see a device one location, see a device another location. Wiggle doesn't at least expose all of the data of every location it's ever seen a device. It only will tell you the last location it's seen a device. But they do actually have a API where you can query information. So if today I go and check for this, and then tomorrow I check for it, and then the day after I check for it, I can obviously just continuously query and find out where it's being seen any given day. So, there are tickets and blog posts open talking about how do I change the name on my flipper device. They say you can't because it's programmed into the one-time programmable memory, and so you need to actually change the code to just pull it from a string instead of pulling it from memory. But even if you change the actual name of the flipper device, you've still got a public BDAdder, so you need to actually change the BDAdder as well. And there is a ticket open for that, but the last post was April 2023, still open as of today, no activity. So if you've got a flipper device, I see you. There we go, yes. And I've seen quite a few of you here. And maybe I'll see your data somewhere else in the future, and then I'll know where your house is. Yeah, not great. Okay, so as I was doing my little cannonball run across the country during the pandemic, originally the plan was, we had planned to go across the country before the pandemic. We were going to go to national parks and stuff like that, make it nice and easy. Instead, we had to zip across as fast as we could. Stayed at a hotel in West Virginia, and there were a bunch of devices that had naming schemes like this, not super easy, 0 to 9, 8 digits, period, 0 to 9, 8 digits, like so. And from my room, I could see 17 instances of those. And I suspected that it was actually the door lock because I knew that there were door locks that use Bluetooth. I looked at my door lock, and then I went and did a bunch of searches and found a thing on the FCC database. This is the manual for this thing. And physically, my door lock looked like this. And this door lock says that it uses Bluetooth Smart, which was the initial marketing name for Bluetooth Low Energy before they gave up on it. So, looked like this. Looking at the BDAdder, I could see that it started with 001755, which corresponds to GE security. It also had a UUID 16, which corresponded to UTC fire and security. And so if we search for that UUID, we see that, okay, those types of devices are prevalent all over the place. Based on this UUID, there's one of them right over there by those apartment buildings. One, though, not dozens of them. So it's not everybody's door, but maybe an exterior door or something like that. So I just randomly zoom in somewhere in America, Charlottesville, zoom in further, and eventually I find that I'm next to a Hilton Charlotte airport. Zoom out a little bit, and I see DoubleTree by Hilton, Hilton Charlotte Airport, and Embassy Suites by Hilton. These all have these BDAdders. And they have a lot of them, right? So these are probably instances where these types of door locks are being used on all the hotel room doors. Now, there had been a past Black Hat talk specifically about breaking into hotel rooms through Bluetooth attacks against devices that they didn't say what the device was. They didn't say what the hotel was. It was just Hotel H. So we don't know what they actually were attacking. But I want to say, why is hotel room security important? Now, maybe you're thinking that I'm going to tell you, it's important to protect against evil maid attacks and someone's going to come in and, infect your computer. But unfortunately, this slide became, much more topically relevant in the last week or so, right? So there is a nice, well-documented YouTube video here, an Associated Wired article, where they basically broke down video footage from the airport and the hotel of a hotel where a Hamas leader was assassinated in 2010 in his hotel room. And of course, they assume that it was Mossad that did it. So what's interesting about that, when they're breaking this all down, is that there was an attempt to reprogram the lock on the door. This is not a Bluetooth lock, I want to be clear. This is a typical magstripe type lock, but they know based on logs and timestamps, and they don't have a camera pointing at the hotel room door where the attackers came in from, but just around the corner and based on timestamps. They know that, at this time, there was an attempt, according to the logs, to rewrite and get into the hotel room based on that. So this is just to say that what kind of people care about hotel room door lock security? the kind of people who do close combat operations and other things where they want to get in and have physical access to somebody. So, from something dark to something a little bit lighter, we're gonna move off the assassination topic now, and we're gonna move to Pokemon Go. That's my transition. Did you know that you don't have to actually get out your phone to play Pokemon Go? You can just go ahead and put on a wristband and it'll buzz anytime there's Pokemon in the area, and you just tap the button and capture the Pokemon. Pretty cool, right? So, Pokemon Go, Bluetooth devices, beaconing Bluetooth everywhere. I don't know why. I don't have one yet. Maybe I'll get one. All right, speaking of things worn on your wrist, fitness trackers. I don't have enough time to talk about all the various other fitness trackers, so I just cut it down to Fitbit. I'll just say straight up, basically everyone uses trackable mediators except Apple, but Apple can still be trackable Apple Watches through other metadata. So there's like at least 3 papers of people looking at the other metadata from Apple that allows for trackability. So just assume everybody is trackable all the time. These are a bunch of Fitbits. But what's more interesting about this data when I started looking at it is that Fitbits actually advertise a 128-bit UUID rather than those 16-bit UUIDs, and they have a lot of similarity between the different UUIDs. So they don't actually have names. So when I look at the BTMON data for it, it doesn't actually have a name. It does have only these UUIDs. But we can actually do some correlation. Oh, sorry, again, like I mentioned before, there's some types of things spew out their names all the time, some things don't. These spew out UUID 128s, and from that we can actually do correlation and know something is a Fitbit. So I didn't know, and I just grepped through my data, and I found all these things in bold that were other Fitbits that had similar UUIDs. So the basic takeaway from this is just to say that these UUIDs can actually tell us something about models, even if we have no information about the actual name. We can't figure out what it is based on name. We can oftentimes figure it out based on UUIDs. All right, in the cars, we have an increasing use of these ODB2 to Bluetooth transmitters. So ODB2 is that diagnostic port in your car. Mechanic would usually plug in some little dongle in order to figure out if your check engine light is blinking. Then they plug into that and it gives them a code that says, here's the reason, here's the error that's occurring right now. So because that's annoying and people don't want to go to the mechanic just to find out why the check engine light is on, they have these devices that you can buy. You plug it into your port and it connects to your phone, and then the phone has an app that will translate error codes based on your particular model. Now, the first ever one of these I saw was this fixed one. There's a whole bunch of other ones that are like white label, just Chinese random knockoff things, no particular company. But this fixed one was interesting because the first time I saw it, it was like a neighbor while I was in California, and I just downloaded the fixed app and I connected to the device, and there was like no authentication whatsoever. And I didn't see any actual data from the device at the time because the car was off. It like said the car is off, but I assume that if I would have turned it on, I would have seen the actual data. Now, these things are particularly dangerous because ODB2 has access to the CAN bus. So for those of you who know something about car hacking, the CAN bus is just the networking inside of it. Think like Ethernet for PC networks. Well, the CAN bus is that inside of cars. So if you can break into these dongles, of which there are many and of which there is very low security, then all of a sudden you can start sending out CAN bus packets. And for some cars, they're just architecturally vulnerable to send a magic packet, turn off the engine, send a magic packet, open up the car doors. So there's actually a much better analysis from Usenix 2020 where they basically bought 77 different ODB2 Bluetooth and Wi-Fi dongles, and they found that of those 77, everything had at least 2 vulnerabilities. So basically, you can assume anyone who's driving around with one of these devices, you can probably get into their car, get onto the CAN bus. All right, now I want to switch up my threat model a little bit here. I want to talk about when there's these types of devices called automated license plate readers, and they're basically just cameras. People put them in public locations. They scan license plates, and then they collect that information. It's becoming increasingly common, even down to the level of like HOAs, like homeowners associations. There's companies that try to get homeowners associations to install license plate camera readers, and then they just sell that data back to police agencies. Now, the whole point of an ALPC is that you want to know when a car enters a location or exits a location. You want to put a person to a location at a time, right? And so the assertion I'm going to make is that Bluetooth devices that are not randomizing their BD adders can start to behave sort of like this. Now, it's not exactly the same because license plates have one-to-one correlations or 1 to small n correlations to like drivers because you have, driver's licenses and things like that. Vehicle registration, rather. But the point is, like, from a forensic perspective, if, like, the police had, like, a Bluetooth scanner that they just stuck in the, Sheraton out there, and if it was just running all year, every year, and if they had them at the airports, and if they had them at, a couple of dozen places, they could start to place Bluetooth devices at locations at given times, right? And so this starts to be a way for forensically, like after they say, like, we think this person committed a crime, can we show that their Bluetooth device was like their Fitbit, which is trackable, was in the location at the time? Yes, we can. So like I say here, I actually had a police officer that I was speaking with one time who was aware of this. He was one of the more technical forensic guys, and he was like, oh yeah, Bluetooth, we know that we can use that to put people to particular locations. So I just want to make the point of this does not mean intrinsically this has to be used for surveillance. So surveillance is where the authorities are collecting information on us. Surveillance is where we are collecting information on the authorities. So I would say that things like Wiggle potentially can be used in forms of surveillance. And so here's my example of that. So there are body cameras that will broadcast Bluetooth devices. And Bluetooth names, rather. This happens to be the model that is used in my county. And so the first time I ever saw one of these devices, like I say, I just looked for things I've never seen before. I knew, based on my GPS coordinate, I knew there was a police officer who pulled someone over in a weird location. So I knew whatever this thing was, this TW37000, it had to be something to do with this police officer. So I know that also, based on looking at eBay pictures, these are serial numbers, so those are unique to their name. And they're also public addresses. So they're public addresses, they say explicitly they're Panasonic according to the OUI. And so the interesting thing to me is, do these devices always broadcast their names, or do they only do it when it's, powered on? And could you say something about, okay, there's a police officer in front of me right now, and, usually these things, they have like a little light on them, and that's supposed to like let the people know you're being recorded right now. But, body cams have a habit of getting turned off in important times when they need to be on. And so there's the question of, like, could you say something about, like, I am being approached by a person in a body camera and their body camera is specifically on? I don't know yet, requires further investigation. But I will also say that at this past DEF CON, there was a talk where they dug deeper into specifically the Axon body cams, which is the company that bought Taser. So sometimes you'll see OUIs that say they're from Taser. These are, this kind of stuff. So they did a deeper dive specifically into body cameras. All right, and medical devices, probably going to go a little bit long. So I would have cut this one for time, but it's in my abstract, so I have to cover it, so I'll cover it quickly. This particular device is called a CPAP, continuous positive airway pressure device. It treats sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is where you're sleeping and then you stop breathing because your airways are clogged or obstructed. Now, one interesting thing is that these happen to have Bluetooth Classic and low energy, but they are both trackable addresses. Now, they also have a serial port, which might be interesting to connect to. Now, the first time that I ever saw one of these things, it was interesting to me because I know that sleep apnea has a correlation to obesity, so obese people are more likely to have sleep apnea, and I also know there's a correlation between poverty and obesity. So what I wanted to know, the first time I ever saw one of these things, I was in a bad neighborhood, and so I said, oh, there's sleep apnea device in a bad neighborhood. Is it because, are there going to be more of these things in poorer neighborhoods, or is it going to be that poor people can't afford sleep apnea devices? So using Wiggle, we can test this hypothesis. We can say, here are all of the sleep apnea devices from Philips Responics in the Washington, D.C. area. And here is an overlay of the income by zip code, I think. I lost the link of where I got this picture from. But I'm going to say overlay of income by zip code. So there's the places that are poor in the DC area. It's known that sort of the southeast is the more poorer area. So is there a positive or negative correlation with these devices? I would say it's more of an inverse correlation. The poorer areas have less Bluetooth sleep apnea devices. All right, hypothesis, mystery solved. All right, and of course you could do that same sort of thing in your area as well if you're interested. All right, medical devices. These are called Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring devices, and these are body-worn devices. And when I say body-worn devices, what I mean is that they're stabbed into you so they can suck your blood. And that's how they tell you whether or not you're doing okay. So Dexcom have static random addresses, so they are trackable. So if there's a person with first of all, just the fact that they're like broadcasting Dexcom is saying like diabetic in the area, right? Second of all, you can track the diabetic where they're going around, so that's not great either. And they say it through a variety of things like the UUID 16 and also some manufacturer-specific information. There's also T-Slim, which is an insulin pump. So continuous glucose, literally that's like marketing from, I think, the T-Slim page. The continuous glucose monitor says, here's how you're doing for blood sugar. And then sometimes these are paired up with insulin pumps so that the insulin pump can just get those readings and say, oh, blood sugar's going high, let's put some insulin into your body and bring it back down. So basically, based on the data coming from these devices, it starts injecting insulin, and this is where it gets really dangerous. Like, there had been a talk, I want to say circa 2011 or so, where a person like hacked their own they hacked their own insulin pump back at like DEF CON Black Hat around 2011. At the time, they were using proprietary wireless protocols. Nowadays, they're just using Bluetooth. And so Bluetooth attacks that allow you to start like man-in-the-middling these communications and start injecting malicious traffic, those start to become like literally life-threatening attacks because, if you inject too much glucose into someone because you sent the wrong message to the insulin pump, then you can, put them in a coma and they can potentially die. So T-Slim, again, random static, it's broadcasting all the time. Hey, I'm a glucose pump. It's always trackable. That's not great, and it says specifically it's a tandem diabetes care device, so pretty easy to tell what it is in that case. Additionally, I'll point out that it has GATT, which is an additional level of essentially attack surface as far as I'm concerned. GATT is just a whole bunch of additional information. It's a protocol for getting read and write information. When you're looking at like a phone app and it gives you more information, it's giving you GATT information. All right, finally, last device anecdote. Heavy construction machinery. So I was driving past some construction on my way back from California to Maryland, and I saw a thing called CAT. I'm from rural Minnesota, so I know CAT must mean caterpillar. And so, yeah, this thing has a little Bluetooth transceiver that's plugged into the CAN bus on the device, and so gets a Bluetooth message, sends a CAN message to say, hey, start up the construction equipment. Looks like this. You got the transceiver, and you've got a little dongle. You can also use your phone if you want. You take the BD adder, which it calls the MAC address right there, and it happens, I can just see based on, this is some YouTube promotional video, like instructional video, how do you set up your Bluetooth device. And so I can see it's Texas Instruments, just based on the BD adder on the external box in the promotional video. Additionally, it says that it's going to be on the back of the key. And yeah, so then the question is, like, basically, I found this, I saw this was super cool, and I was like, honey, we got to hack this. And so how would someone like my wife hack this if she was going to do that? Well, first thing she'd do is go to the FCC database, pull out the chip ID, right? She already has Texas Instruments exploits. Look up the data sheet, CC 2541, go off and buy a dev board because you can just buy these things from the vendors for, creating new devices. And then you go to eBay and you search, like, can I get one of these so I can attack the real thing? Well, turns out there were none of them on eBay, but I was doing the searching for her, and what I did find was these Caterpillar keys. And when I looked at the supported models list at the end of this, that started making me a little bit suspicious that these might be universal Caterpillar keys. And then I went back and I looked at the eBay key versus the FCC key versus the user manual key. And indeed, they all seem to be keyed the same. So I was super excited when I first saw the CAT construction equipment. I was like, yes, we're going to do this stunt hacking thing where we're going to like go exploit a Caterpillar tractor and we're going to like take it off. We're going to pretend to like tear down a building and it's going to be awesome, right? But then, people / me told me that, well, the physical security actually for Caterpillars is very low, and you can just spend $9 to get a universal key and steal stuff that way. So in that case, no, I'm not hacking it anymore. That's not worth months of my time to break a Bluetooth device when I can just do it for $9 and take the next construction equipment over. So took off my attacker hat, put my security architect hat back on, and I said, actually, it turns out Bluetooth is a win for these devices. I thought it was like, oh man, that's so insecure. I'm totally going to be able to hack that and steal the equipment. Well, now that I know that it's so easy to steal equipment now, it's actually, even if it's super vulnerable, it's going to take weeks or months for people to exploit the Bluetooth and do the reverse engineering and everything else. So turns out it's actually a win. That's the end of my anecdotes. Takeaways. All right, so the first thing is you may already be familiar with Wi-Fi, sniffing, stumbling. It's been very active for the past 2 decades. I want to be clear, Bluetooth sniffing and stumbling has different goals. It should have different goals. I think the most important goal is to find out whether the devices themselves are vulnerable, not just to know there was a Bluetooth device there at one point. I don't actually care about the tracking. I just put that up, for your amusement. I care about what chip is it using so I know whether it's vulnerable, because nobody knows right now. We know there are exploits out there, but we don't know what they apply to. The concept of Bluetooth, vulnerability assessment does not exist. You won't be able to find out whether your PC is vulnerable, whether your car is vulnerable, or anything else. There's a whole bunch of devices out there where we don't even know what they are, like this thing. I've never been able to figure out what that is, and there's lots of other stuff I don't know what it is. There's a whole bunch of devices that don't say what they don't give a name at all. And so for those kind of things, we have to start trying to tease out what it is through other ways. And so my call to action is to join me, and together we will rule the Bluetooth galaxy. I like that. There was a little bit of an echo there for a second. All right. So the call to action here is, this is just, using skills other than my own. If you know Android development, Wiggle has an Android application. They could use some help putting additional Bluetooth stuff in there. I don't know Android development. Sorry, I'm a firmware guy. So if you want to contribute to that, I've got a whole list of stuff that we'd like to have the Wiggle people collect, but we need Android people to give that to them. Another thing is, it would be really nice if we could crowdsource the additional metadata that Wiggle doesn't collect right now. And simple stuff like, you may have a Bluetooth device and you may know it broadcasts this name, but I don't know that. But you can know it because you physically have the device in your possession. I'd like to have a way to put that up on a wiki somewhere, but not just like a media wiki, like Wikipedia style thing. It needs to have something that has back-end database integration. That's the part I don't know how to do. So if you know how to do that kind of stuff, I'd love to work with you to put something useful together. And finally, again, I put my software out there. I told you which hardware. It's literally $15 Raspberry Pi. It's the best option right now. So if you go out and collect some data, happy to share my data and share alike sort of situation. All right, so I told you what I want to know. I want to know whether things have particular Bluetooth vulnerabilities. Now what I know is that sometimes, yes, I can know which particular chip it has based on things like the BD adder, if it's a classic device or a Bluetooth low energy public device, if the OUI is specifically a silicon vendor, if I know Texas Instruments, Silicon Labs, Expressive, if they're advertising I'm a silicon vendor, it's probably running that silicon. And then also sometimes the UUID 16s will actually be the silicon vendor name, and then again, I can say it's probably running that silicon. But for a lot of other stuff, there is actually stuff in the Bluetooth spec for types of packets I can send, but I have to go off and collect them myself because they're not collectible through the normal APIs and operating system layer stuff. You have to run custom firmware and send custom packets to get the information back. So that's what I'm doing to all of you right now. And that's what I was doing right there at DEF CON at a nice strategic choke point where everyone has to go through that location. But yeah, so this will be my further research where I dig deeper into, this was what's the interesting stuff I saw? Next up is what have I learned about how specifically to try to figure out and tease out chips. This will be first presented at hardware.io in November. All right, so that's it. Final thing is just to say, again, Bluetooth research is cool, but this is my 25% of my time cool thing, right? It's fun and I'm doing it for fun, but there's a reason why I spend 75% of my time making free classes for you, because I think that's a whole lot more impactful, right? So I have classes on assembly and operating systems internals. If you saw the memory forensics thing yesterday, we cover 60% of that stuff about how all the background stuff works. Already have a class up on that. So that's my talk. I appreciate your time. And since it's now lunchtime, I will take questions at the back or the front. Am I allowed to stay here? All right, I'll take questions in the front.
this is the special token we give to
Mm.
every presenter. It's a small token
Appreciate
of
it.
appreciation for your time. So it's a special token.
Yep. Challenge coins are good.
Thanks. Have fun.